Hello and welcome everybody to a very special emergency episode of the Dead Draw Gaming podcast. Looking a little bit differently this time around. It is just me, your host, Etchy, joined by the one and only Andrew Hedrick, our NAIC champion. Hedrick, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Happy to be home and get to be on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this episode. If you're wondering why it's kind of a different format than normal, it's because Dead Draw Gaming did too well at NEIC, and there's too many people that I want to have on. So basically, I figured we'll do a one-on-one episode with Andrew here as our emergency episode, since Andrew did win the event. And then next week we'll get in everyone else who got top 32 or better at the event. So we'll have Gantner, Nick, and Gabe Smart as well. They'll all be on. We'll talk with them about their runs, and I'll talk about my run then too, which because I did make it my first day too, so that was exciting. But today's not about that. Today is about Hedrick's championship run. But before we get into that, this is going to be more than just talking about that run. We're going to be talking about to Hedrick about his past as a competitor as well. And I think the best place to start is if you could just tell me about yourself, Andrew, without mentioning Pokemon or TCG.
Yeah, so I'm from Iowa, 20 years old now, just turned 20 in May, and I go to the University of Iowa and I'm a data science student.
Okay, very cool. I was not aware of. I knew you were a student. I was not aware of the data science thing. Does the data science stuff you learn correlate at all with some of the Pokemon stuff you do in the TCG?
I mean, occasionally the probability stuff
Yeah, yeah,
can
that's what
like
I
kind
figured.
of weigh in, but a lot of it, like the interest is kind of similar between both of them too, where there's a lot of like thinking different things,
Hmm.
considering different.
Yeah, I know data science and computer science are like two of the, or like computer science in general and anything related to are like the most common like TCG players study fields. So this is
Yeah.
not super surprising. Um, so I know one of the things that surprised me the most when people were talking about your run at this event, and Gabe was already calling you the goat preemptively, is it was actually Gabe who said this too. Was that this is only your third season of competitive play, right? So when did you actually start playing the Pokemon trading card game?
Yeah, so I have been playing since I was pretty young. Around like maybe first or second grade, I started like collecting the cards. Some of my friends like had them at school, and I wanted to be involved. But then my dad eventually said like, if you're gonna collect all the cards, you might as well like learn how to play the game because you already have all of them anyway. So my parents started like trying to play the game with me, learn how to play, and like encouraged me to like then attend a local league in West Des Moines, Iowa, where I lived, to kind of like get to play with some other people who also liked playing the game. And over time, I got a little bit better. I still wasn't great. In seniors, I did get one Worlds invite, and I also got top four at a regional with Tapu Bulu GX, but I still wasn't great. Most of those points just came from like league cups and stuff, where I was the only senior, or there was a couple seniors there. So it definitely wasn't quite as hard of an invite. But then I kind of took a year off my sophomore year of high school, which was then the year that COVID happened.
Right.
And at that point, I didn't have as much to do, and one of my friends encouraged me to get back into the game, play the Limitless qualifiers that they had. So I started like playing some decks, and I really liked Baby Blacephalon, and that was kind of a deck that I walked into and played a lot of games with, and started trying to get me back into the tournaments. And then as the online scene evolved, I played more different online tournaments and
Right.
was getting more and more involved in the game.
Yeah, those limitless online qualifiers are actually your first limitless entries period on the limitless page, which I thought was pretty interesting. Uh, I know the online scene obviously at the time was very different from kind of how things are now. Obviously during COVID, no locals, everyone was playing online. They're like very different now. Where like still good players do online tournaments and stuff, but there was less of an emphasis on it. It's not like every good player was doing all these online tournaments because that's all they could do back then. So could you kind of talk about how the scene kind of felt at that time as someone who did play in locals previously?
Yes, it was really interesting. I definitely took them probably more serious than a lot of people did because I hadn't like had the experience to get to play against like masters really before because my sophomore year of high school was my first masters year.
Right,
I
right.
was like, this invite's gonna be a lot harder. I might just want to do some other things this year. So I wasn't really, it wasn't really the same way. So I didn't really get to play in those big tournaments with a bunch of masters in them. So then when we started having the online tournaments, I was actually like trying in them. I was like, I actually want to win these,
Mhm.
and I would feel pretty proud when I did well in them.
Yeah, I know. Jake wanted me to specifically mention that back then we were there wasn't limitless back then, so all these there wasn't like The
all
you'd
the
have to do
modes.
like the online tournaments on like Challenge and this thing called Battlefy, which apparently is like an Apex Legends thing primarily for doing the tournament stuff. And he wanted me to mention that you and him would always meet in the finals of these tournaments.
Yeah,
um,
that was back in the day when they were definitely a little bit smaller too,
yeah,
it felt like. And then but Play Limitless definitely helped a lot, so that was huge.
for sure.
Came out with that.
Yeah, Limitless obviously big game changer for a lot of things as that came along, especially during this heavy online kind of format as we were going along with Pokemon TCG. This is before I started playing too, by the way, so it's enlightening for me as well. I started playing in the 2022-2023 season. Before that, obviously, regionals did come back before that season started, and you attended two of them, or at least two of them. You did the Indie regionals and the NAIC 2022 in Columbus for the 2022 season. Got top 32 at one, top 64 at NAIC. Can you kind of talk me through how kind of going back to physical events was during that time?
Yeah, so Indianapolis was my first event as a master, like but besides like maybe like a League Cup or a League Challenge I attended maybe once in the year before COVID. So I was really nervous. I definitely was expecting everyone to be better than me. I was not super confident going in, but I did play a lot of games with my deck. I was playing Arceus and Teleon Moltres. And then when I ended up making it to top 32 at the end, especially considering I did also, like, completely throw one of my rounds in day 2. I was like, I could have done even better, but I was really happy to get 32 and kinda say, "Okay, maybe I can compete with some of these
Right, right.
better players in the master division."
Yeah, it's beyond just playing online too, so that's good to see. And then your 2023 season was really kind of your breakout one. Starting off pretty strong here with the Peoria top eight with Paul Cantelion, and then of course what most people knew you for before the last month really was the back to back wins with Lugia back in February 2023. What do you think kind of changed with your process for kind of testing and preparing for tournaments between the previous season and the season where you really kind of came into your own as a player?
Yeah, so I think, like, one of the big things was just understanding how, like, the tournaments work, right? It's not, like, quite the same thing as playing an online tournament. There are
Yeah,
these really
yeah.
long, tournaments that you have to play lots of rounds each day against really good players, so it's gonna end up being pretty tiring, and there's other things to consider too. It's not just necessarily making the best play throughout these tournaments. So it's really interesting because you have to, like, attend the tournaments to understand, like, the whole experience of it, and I would say that's just, like, a good thing to have to that you're gonna have to learn and understand, and as you go to more tournaments, it becomes easier.
Right. In terms of like preparation for, let's say, your Orlando regionals win, what was kind of your prep process for that looking like? Like 2 weeks before the regional, how were you preparing for the event?
I mean, I would just say I was trying to play as many games as possible with my deck. One interesting thing is I went to a Chicago like 1K and I was getting destroyed by Raikou Rayquaza,
Yeah,
and I was like, I don't want to keep losing to this. So I put a Wash Energy in my deck for my mana fee to stop all the Raikou attacks, and that actually ended up helping me a lot, especially when I
yeah,
hit Nick
yeah.
Moffat in top four with his Raikou Rayquaza deck. So I don't know, just playing as many games as you can, and then trying to find the matchups that you're struggling with, and then see if there's a one card answer or just like a different route you could take in those matchups. Because sometimes if you wait till the tournament to learn what matchups are a problem, then you might not. It might take you longer to identify like either what plays or what cards you might need to fix. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously,
And at
if
that
you get
point,
into the
it's
tournament and
pretty
you
late.
haven't figured it out yet, that's pretty bad. So.
Yeah, yeah, you can't really change your cards at that point. So if you're missing a attacker that you need, then not in a good spot. And I do want to kind of come back to kind of this prep process that you mentioned, of just playing a lot of games, because this has been a kind of recurring theme for you. This is the exact same answer you gave when I asked about your prep process for India as well. So kind of talking about the current season right now. Obviously, you've had a really strong season here as well. Even before getting the Indy win, you still got a top cut at the very start of the season with Pittsburgh, getting top four with Single Strike Lugia, and then a couple top 64s, top 32s between then and Indy. Indy getting your big win with Dialga, which we already talked about. If you want to get more insight on how that went for Andrew, you can check out that episode of the podcast about a month ago now. And then we come to NAIC 2024, your big IC win. There's a lot to talk about with this, and I think my approach for how I want to kind of talk to you through this is basically just kind of doing a timeline of 2 weeks before the event up to you winning the event, and just kind of going through every step along the way, what obstacles you faced, what preparation you took, people that helped you along the way, all that kind of stuff. So I think the best place to start is probably when we last talked before I saw you at NAIC, which was on the podcast. This was 3 weeks before the event. You mentioned you've been testing Lugia a lot and feeling pretty good about it. I remember asking everyone after the podcast what I should play, and the consensus was either Guardy or Lugia. So I guess my first question is, when did this Lost Box list slash idea start being your main focus? Was this like 2 weeks before the event, 3 weeks? Is this something you were testing on the side already?
I think maybe it was, like, right after that, to be honest. I don't exactly remember, but I started testing against Ethan Heggie. He wanted to
Right.
play some games because he had the Japan Nationals, which was, like, a week before, and he was playing Lost Box against me, which was a deck I'd kind of written off, but he was, like, beating me a lot with it, and I was like, "Okay, maybe this deck's not that bad." But I did think that the list might need to get changed a little bit, so I kinda came back to this list that I had played at Toronto earlier this season that I really liked for Lost Box, that was, like, supposed to go really fast, had a bunch of Pokestops,
Right.
Lost Vacuums, like, you just go through your entire deck, try to get as many like, whatever cards you need that turn to pull off these big plays. I was like, I think this deck seems pretty good because the Dragapult matchup had been one that was kind of scary to me. But if you can get to those turn two Sableye plays potentially, or at least Greninja if they don't get down a Manaphy or something, you can kind of take out their board and then get it far enough ahead to where you can find a way to take out the last two prizes to close out the game or something like that. So I was really interested in playing a really fast Lost Box deck when I was looking at the format and what decks were expected to be popular. So that was kind of the deck that I started then working from after deciding that Lost Box is probably a pretty good deck. So I started making a couple of changes to it for the format, but, it definitely came a long way from there still.
For sure. So basically between like around 2 weeks before the event, then you were testing this a little bit with Ethan, and were you already talking about it with your testing group as well, and having them work on it at that point?
Yeah, I'd sort of been, like, telling a bunch of people in the testing group how good the deck was. I don't think Gabe was too fond of it, to be honest. He
Right.
wasn't a
Right.
huge Lost Box believer, but I got some of the other people on it, playing it for sure, like, Michael was playing it.
Yeah.
Some of the other seniors were playing it too, and I was also messaging a couple other people like Christian Franco about the deck as well. I was just trying to get a lot of different input on the deck because I knew that the list needed a lot of work.
Hmm.
So I was trying to get as many perspectives as possible to get information about what matchups do we need to work on, like what cards can beat these matchups, and like what lines do we need to take to beat different matchups.
So when you say you're trying to when you say a deck needs a lot of work, how are you kind of identifying this, and what are you um like prioritizing in terms of like what do you focus on for it?
So the concept of the deck felt really good, but there were definitely these situations that I would get into playing games where I'm like, I don't really know how I can win here. We probably need
Right.
to like go back to the drawing board and try to understand like what we did wrong in this matchup or what cards we should change in our deck to improve these different matchups. Like I know Lugia kind of ended up being a matchup where it felt like we had to get pretty lucky and get pretty far ahead to win. And then we had people in the group who were hitting like Iron Thorn's Lost Box on the ladder, and we were kind of like making fun of it. We're first like, why would you ever play that? But then we started talking about it, and we're like, well, actually, this does kind of beat Lugia. Maybe we should put this into our deck
Right.
to
Right.
improve that matchup. And so that was like one of the changes that we went through.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's go then to, let's say, 1 week before the event. You seems like this is the deck you've pretty much only been working on at that point. I think I messaged you probably around that time too, and you already said you were not talking about Lugia anymore anyway. So you're fully locked in on this deck idea, fully focused on it. Seems like your testing group also fully focused on it. What does that last week of prep look like for you?
So near the end, we were just kind of trying to decide on like the last couple of cards for the deck. Like because we had already like, at this point, we had cut the Forest Steelstone package with Raikou and stuff just to play the Iron Thorns.
Right.
We were kinda trying to decide like, I know Roxanne was one of the cards that was a big debate. Like, I didn't love playing Roxanne, but it kinda felt like something where it could help you, come back against some players who maybe didn't close out the game entirely, or if your opponent knew you didn't play it, they could go for completely different lines, so that could be bad late in the tournament. So that was a card we talked about a lot, just trying to make sure our deck has all of the consistency cards it needs to close out the games, but, yeah, we kind of, like, had already decided on the deck at that point, and
Yeah.
most of the list just trying to kinda close out the last couple of slots, and I really feel like that's what you should be aiming to do. You should probably try to have your deck locked in a little bit in advance and just be focusing on the last few slots in the deck near the end.
Yeah, I've had some really good players. Their rule of thumb is like 1 week before the event, you should be down to one deck. 2 weeks before the event, you can be down to two decks. 3 weeks, etc. Stuff like that. That's totally fine. So makes sense. So during this time, like these 1 to 2, 3 weeks before, you say you just play a lot of ladder games pretty often, just to spam games with the deck. Were you spamming ladder games with this specific deck as well as part of your prep, or was it just against
This
other
deck
people like testing
this
group?
deck was a little bit harder to test on ladder because it your strategies are way different, like, depending on matchups and depending what your opponent does.
Yeah.
So this was a deck I did, like, value, like, playing against, like, better players a little bit more with, I feel like, because it does change a lot. I had a lot of my testing group, they were testing different matchups against each other, trying to figure out the best lines in those matchups and stuff. I know one of the important things was warning against Gardevoir, you probably should not be going in with a Cramorant turn 1 unless your board's, like, fully established with, like, an
Right.
Iron Bundle and a Pokestop in play. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself where if you get the unfair stamp Flutter Mane, you probably aren't doing very much.
Right.
So, like, learning the different interactions with matchups was pretty important. So I think, like, we were trying to focus on actually playing specific matchups against better players with this deck because this deck's, like, your strategy changes a lot matchup to matchup.
Okay. And yeah, this was different from the case with Dialga deck, right?
The Dialga, like, it felt like your deck was more, like, generally straightforward, so it was fun to just play against, like, different, like, random people and random decks because it was more just about finding the best list for that deck because your strategy was pretty similar throughout every matchup.
Yeah. With kind of a side note with that too, when you are playing these ladder games with the deck that you're heavily testing to bring to some big tournament, are you like worried about leaking the play or anything while you're doing this?
I mean, I've thought about it a little bit, but it's not usually a huge deal. People play random stuff on the ladder all the time.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like it's kinda just like you don't really know how serious someone's actually considering the cards in their deck. But like I said, we did get the Iron Thorns idea from playing against someone else
Yeah.
on ladder, so I don't know. You can get interesting, ideas from ladder, but it's not I'm not, like, extremely worried to the point where it's worth, like, losing out on an opportunity to get, like, easy games in.
Yeah. Ladder's pretty fun. You can also still hit really good players on ladder all the time. I the week before NAIC actually ended up hitting Hermione and then Sawyer back to back on ladder. So you can still get quality games for there for sure. It's just
I think Hermione might have been one of the people playing Iron Thorns. I don't entirely remember, but
yeah. I don't know. I don't he was not playing Iron Thorns when I hit him on ladder. But this was like a week
okay.
and a half before the event. Was I knew it was Hermione because their name was Hermione04 and also they were playing the Rotom and the Luminion. So
Okay.
I figured as
Yeah.
much, but um yeah. So kind of going back to it now. So, kind of fast forward a little bit. It is now the day before the event. So, Thursday. Your group's pretty locked in on the list still, and just seems to be doing some final testing, kind of where you mentioned, kind of locking down the last couple of cards. How is your group feeling about the deck in general going into this last day?
I mean, I would say we felt pretty good, pretty confident. At this point, I kind of just decided on my 60. I know some other people were trying to debate different cards, but I was pretty confident in the list that we had made, and that was what I like had already submitted and
Yeah,
didn't end up changing at all. So I felt really good at the end. I don't even think I played too many games on the last day. I think I played more on Wednesday, to be honest.
sure. What was the Wednesday testing like then?
Yeah, I actually got Rowan to play a lot of games of his Gardevoir Klefki deck against me, which
Oh,
I
really?
guess
Okay.
that ended up being a pretty good matchup to know how to play against.
Just a
So
little bit, yeah. Yeah, I know. I
yeah,
know you mentioned he tested with you again on Saturday, so we'll talk about it. Or Sunday
Sunday
morning. Yeah, so we'll
morning.
talk about that later too. Um, but yeah, so during this last day, how is that kind of process of everyone kind of having different exact takes on the deck idea go? Because like you mentioned, Andy was top eight with 59 of the same 60. Ethan's 60 was also different in a couple different cards, so more than just a 59 one card change. Um, kind of how is like I don't know how to phrase this like kind of all these different ideas going around. Like, how are you so confident in your 60 specifically?
Yeah, so I think like the majority of people ended up playing like my exact list, but there were definitely a couple of people who played slightly different lists as well. I don't know. I feel like I was very confident in my card choices, and but I like it's not bad to like if you're playing one card different, it's probably not going to be a
Sure,
huge deal
sure.
for the end up result of the list. I don't think that's a big deal. I think that like letting people play whatever they think is slightly better is fine. Like that's generally my philosophy. Just trust your own instincts. I mean, there is technically one card that's probably slightly better, but overall, it's not going to be a huge deal if you have differing beliefs on a card or two.
Right, right. So, uh, day one now starts. It starts with you waiting for the marching band to go through the room, watching JW dance in front of you. Uh, what do you want to just kind of walk through like your entire day one and just all the rounds and how that all went?
Yeah, my day one definitely went decent, I guess. I ended up 6-2-1. I
Right.
started off with a Raging Bolt that I was able to beat. He didn't draw super well. Let me pull up my matchups here.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was able to beat a Raging Bull and a Dragapult and a Gardevoir. The Gardevoir was Henry on stream. He was playing a really interesting Gardevoir list,
Yes.
like with Squawkabilly and Double Monkey Dory. I think he was like a turn slow game one, and then game two he fully bricked. So I don't think he got to fully pull off the strategies that he wanted to before I was able to kind of set up my board all the way. But he didn't really have the Klefki or the double Flutter Mane or anything. So it wasn't a super tough matchup for me. Like it was when I was fine hitting, but he also seemed like he thought it was a fine match if he was able to set up. So might have been a little bit more interesting if he had the board that he wanted to get to. But I was able to take the win in those. I did lose to Makani on a somewhat similar Lost Box deck in round
Right.
four. Um, which we had some pretty interesting games. That matchup is really interesting in general, Lost Box Mirror,
Hmm.
especially like with the Iron Hands now. I think like it used to be a lot less interesting, but in this format, it feels like pretty. It can play out a lot of different ways. It's not just like using the Sableye over and over again like it used to be like
Hmm.
6 months ago or when I used to play the deck. So, and then after that, I was able to take a few more wins. I did get to 6-1. I did unfortunately lose to a lost Dragapult at that point. I definitely could have played better game three. I was pretty mad at myself with how I played that out because I was like, I should be 7-1, not even having to worry about what I do in the last round.
Right. Right.
Now I'm 6-2. Usually I would want to play, but considering I just wanted to get enough points to make sure I locked up the top 16 for Worlds, I was like, I have my ID. I'm going to see who my opponent is, and then I hit Jared Grimes, who's a pretty good player, not someone I really wanted to hit in at 6-2. So I just decided to take the tie to try to lock up
Right.
enough points in day two for that I needed to get top 16 for North America for the year.
Yeah, that ID decision, one that normally people are like very strongly against, but I see is obviously much better pricing than your regular regional. Top 64 still gets you 2 grand. Like you said, lock up top 16 makes a lot of sense. Um, how were you feeling about the deck at the end of day one? Obviously, 6-1 not where you want to be, but it sounds like your main loss was one of your losses was very much in your control, right?
Yeah, my loss to Makani, I also could have definitely played better in the game one that I lost. So overall, I felt like both the rounds I lost, I could have played better, and I was definitely feeling really good about the deck. Like a bunch of the seniors who were playing the deck were doing pretty well too.
Right, right,
A bunch of the masters who played it had also made it today too. So I was like, overall, our group had done pretty well. There were definitely a couple people who wished they had better days. I know Caleb Rogerson only went 5-4 with the deck. He hit some really awkward matchups. I know like he hit very crazy decks. I think
like what?
he had like a Frostlass. He had Xander Perot's deck. I think it was like
Okay.
Frostlass something. I don't know. He hit very weird matchups. I think he also lost like a control deck. But overall, our group did do pretty well on the deck. So it was a pretty good day overall, to be honest.
Yeah, makes sense. And then day two begins. Also, I should note we were like sitting next to each other or like near each other for like 4 rounds straight at the end of day one, and then started day two. And then I lose day two, round one, because I hit somebody who is effectively on your list, well, on Andy's list, and I did not know they were on your list, and I was playing Lugia, so I got caught off guard. And then as
Did
soon
you
as
play an answer to the Iron Thorns in your deck?
no, no, I didn't. But
Okay.
I had game one. I could have Luminion for boss preemptively if I was expecting it, but I just wasn't expecting it, so got caught off guard. Would have been fine that game probably, but game two they started and then I just lose.
Okay.
But yeah, so as soon as I lose that round, I don't see you for the rest of the day. I didn't even know you like made top eight until like after I had already left for dinner at that point. I'm like, what? How? We were this like the same record, and did he just win every game? And you yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So kind of walk me through how your day two went.
Yeah, I actually had some crazy rounds like early in day two, like round 10. I beat a Lugia with a Flutter Mane. One of my friends actually, um, he game three, his board was Flutter Mane, Lugia, Mincino after his turn one. It was now my turn two. I used Iron Bundle. He promoted Mincino. I powered up my Iron Thorns at the end of my turn. Then I used an Iron Bundle again, and now he's stuck between either promoting his only Lugia or promoting his Flutter Mane. And he chooses Flutter Mane, I kill it, and now he can't turn off my Iron Thorns, and I was able to take that game. So the double Iron Bundle clutched up there. It was really interesting. Round 11, I hit a Lost Box Mirror. In game three, I'm drawing really bad, but my opponent has some really awkward Lost Zones, and we have a gentleman's agreement. And so we're like, if it looks like someone's going to win the game, we'll give them the win because the tie would knock you out of top cut contention.
Right.
And at the end of the game, like they didn't have enough resources to close out the game after I used some bosses. I wasn't drawing great, but yeah, they're awkward. They had pretty awkward lost zones a couple of times, and So I was barely able to take that one on the gentleman's. We laid out our hands in our deck, and she didn't have enough resources to close out the game, so she gave me the win, which was really nice of her. And then round 12, had another lost box. Was definitely a little bit more straightforward that time, but still some pretty good games. And then round 13, I went draw pass against a Chen Pao game 3, but I was able to get there with some really interesting maneuvering. Like, I didn't bench 2 comfies turn 2 to play around the ninja,
Right, right.
force him to get hands, which he wasn't able to find, and then I was barely able to close up the game with an amp at the end. So it was pretty crazy games, but then after that, I was able to beat Lucas Zing on Chen Pao, where that round I drew better than him, and I also started Iron Thorn's game too.
Yeah.
So it made him miss turn 2 attack, which was really interesting. I don't like Iron Thorns can be pretty good in that match if you get it up before they can do anything. It turns out they're ninja and they're shivery chill, which definitely
Right.
gives them a slower start. And then I killed his barrel with it the following turn, and his draws from there weren't great. And then round 15, I hit Isaiah Bradner, had a slow start on stream, but I did get a little bit lucky at the end to make up for that slow start and get enough cards to close out the game.
Yeah, and then obviously you get into top 8 now. And the top 8 match is probably the one I'm most interested in hearing about because it's the one that we didn't get to see because obviously we saw your top 4 and your top 2 match, but can you kind of go in detail on what happened with your top 8 match?
Yeah, so I hit a Gardevoir with 2 Flutter Mains, which is pretty scary. To be honest, I think I'd rather play against that than Klefki still, though, because Klefki they can get out with a Buddy Puff in turn 1. Flutter Main's a little bit harder for them to find. So I think I'd still rather play against the Flutter Main, double Flutter Main.
Sure.
Game 1, he was able to get out both Flutter Mains before I really did anything. But I was able to use Pokestop a few times. I think I used a Chorus and then got, I think, to 4 cards in the Lost Zone. And then I was able to use a boss's orders, like use a few comfies after that, like to get to 7. And then I used 3 Mirage Gates to power up Greninja and Iron Hands. Greninja both his Curlias. And from there, he wasn't able to do very much, and I ended up taking that game. And then game 2, he had a slower start, and he wasn't able to get out the Flutter Mains right away, which was definitely an advantage for me. And that game went really long, but I was able to close out the game by using Sableye on 2 Gardevoir EXs because he had kind of evolved out of things to try to stop me taking enough one prize KOs.
Hmm.
But I used Sableye on both his Gardevoir EXs so he couldn't Turo both of them. And then all I had to do was attack with an Ursaluna to knock one out since they both had a little bit of damage on them already from Psychic Embraces.
Gotcha.
It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Seems like a pretty straightforward though, kind of clean set there. And then we get into the top 4 match with you and Kaiwin, and that is the very funny drawn out game 1. What was kind of going through your mind as you were like losing that game?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I was in a pretty good spot to start with, but he kind of slowly wore me down. I think he used like an unfair stamp maybe, and I wasn't
Yeah.
drawing too hot.
Yeah, you
And then
you're
he
just like
eventually
draw
knocked out
passing,
my
and yeah, it was tough.
yeah. He knocked out my hands, but I felt like I still had a route in the game if I could pull off an attack that turn, but then I missed attack that turn as well. And then it kind of fell apart from there, and that game kind of got away from me, and I wasn't able
Right,
to do very much at the end.
right. And then you get into game 2. I don't remember how that game started. Oh, the game 2 is the game I think you just like amp 2 times immediately, and the game's over.
Yeah, game 2 is really I think he had kind of a slow start. I think he had 1 Curlia up. And then kind of throughout the turn, I wasn't really gonna go for Prime Catcher knockout on it, but then I was like, okay, his hand's really low and he only has 1 Curlia. And so then I kind of like changed my play to go for Prime Kill Curlia, and then he really didn't have a very good response off of that. And I was kind of able to just like completely clean up the game from there.
Gotcha. And then yeah, game 3 obviously does not get fully completed. You amp set up the hands, and then Kaiwan can't really respond to it and can't take enough prizes in time. Before we get in, so that's how the end of your day 2 goes. You're making finals. I kind of want to rewind a little bit because I forgot to talk about it. But between you making top 8 at the end of round 15 and the start of top 8, what are you kind of doing in that time? Obviously, hopefully besides eating and getting water and stuff.
Yeah, I think I was talking to people trying to figure out like what my opponent was playing, what cards were in their deck, because that's definitely something where at that point in the tournament you probably have friends who have played against these different people
Right, right.
or have seen their games at some point at least and trying to get a little bit of information on what cards you might have to go against because that's definitely a way you can gain an advantage or not make sure you're not at a disadvantage at least if your opponent knows your list. Is just trying to figure out what cards are in the deck. That's like one of the best uses of the little bit of time you have before
Yeah,
top
because
eight.
you really don't have that much time, right? It's like maybe an hour at most, but Not time to actually like practice against any any
Yeah.
similar deck or anything. Um, and then that night after top four concludes, you're making the finals. How do you spend your time that evening?
Yeah, I was kind of just relaxing. I went and got pizza with some of my friends, and then kind of just and tried to go to bed fairly early, to make sure that I was gonna be rested for tomorrow. And then when I woke up in the morning, we still had a lot of time before I had to go to the convention center. So I got Rowan up, and he played a best of three of Stefan's list against me, and I was able to win 2-1. So I was feeling a little bit more confident after that. So.
How was that kind of test match? How did that go? Did you have a timer for that, or were you just kind of just talking through the lines,
We were
kind of
we
going
were
through
just
it?
playing, just playing games of the
Okay,
matchup, yeah. I would definitely drew a little bit better in those than I ended up drawing in finals, though. He didn't, like, get the clef key established immediately, or, like, I would go first, and I would actually use a few comfies first. So, I definitely felt a little bit better during those games than I ended up feeling like during game 1. I was looking, and I couldn't do very much for a while.
right, right. Was there any kind of big takeaways or kind of key lessons that you weren't already aware of, kind of going into the finals that you learned from that session?
I would say I probably learned more when we played on Wednesday against the matchup, to be honest, because at that point, I hadn't played against it too much, kinda learning, like, the different ways you can take advantage of their deck, like, or what you kinda have to do on turn 1 to make sure that you have a response if you go first, right? Try to use, like, 3 comfy, so then all you need is a vacuum and a chorus to get to 7, ideally, and then at that point, if you're at 7, you can do a lot more with your Mirage Gates, right? So.
Right, right. Makes sense. So, fast forward a little bit, a couple hours. It is now the finals. You're up on stage against Stefan, playing the matchup. Kind of talk through what you were thinking during that matchup and how things were going.
Yeah, so, like, game 1, I definitely wasn't feeling too great. I was
Yeah,
kinda just, like, trying to I was trying to just, like, see if I could pull anything off. I was When he boss killed my Iron Hands, I was like, "Okay, maybe I can do something now." I get my abilities back. I'd been kinda saving Buddy Poffins in hand because I knew if I benched Comfies, he would just be killing them with, like, Monkey Dory and
right, right,
Fluttermane's residual damage, so I was like, "I'm gonna try to put up, like, bigger HP things like this Greninja, have this Iron Hands on my board, kinda try to force him to do something or else give me even more turns to maybe draw out of it." So then when he killed my Iron Hands, I, like, benched all my comfies. I got to 7 and used the Greninja, go to 4, and make it, and I didn't have any 2 prizes on my board at that point, so he really couldn't win the game that
right.
turn, kinda trying to force it to where I could actually go to 1, like, force him to take a knockout on, like, a 1-turn clock was kinda the goal. And I think he might have had a couple other options he could have gone for, but, like, going for an Iono play, and then I was able to set up the Iron Hands and kinda force him to have plays on that turn. And he didn't have game, but he did have the confusion play, which I definitely should have considered a little bit more.
Yeah,
That was something
I was,
I
I was
didn't
gonna ask if you had
think
like
of.
thought about that at all as what they were gonna go for.
So, uh, Andrew Gantner, he had actually told me that Stefan occasionally, like, was using that attack against him, but I just had completely left my mind, so I had forgotten that that was an option, and I did have Switch in deck, so I think I probably wasn't supposed to bump the Pokestop. I didn't wanna give him, like, more ways to find what he needed potentially, and I wanted to kinda thin out my hand with that Lost Vacuum if he Iono'd me to try
Right.
to find boss off of the Iono, but I should have left it in play because I didn't consider the confusion, and then when he went for that, I couldn't draw the last switch in my deck, and I couldn't quite get out of it, so I had to end up flipping for the confusion.
Yeah. So what what were you saying when you decided to go for the flip? What was
I
going on in
was
that
I
moment?
was, like, checking over my hand, like, 5 times to make sure I wasn't missing an obvious play to, like, not have to flip for it. I was like, "I don't wanna be wrong about this." If I flip tails, I wanted to make sure I went over every option I had in my hand, but the cards didn't change. I didn't have anything different in there. So I ended up having to flip for it. I bossed Manaphy in case he couldn't retreat it. I knew
Yeah.
he used Earthen Vessel the turn before, but I kinda, like, lost track on if where the energies had gone, and I'm like, "Well, if I flip tails, I'm losing anyway, so I might as well just play this," and kept
Right.
looking at my hand, and I was like, "Okay, we're gonna see if I can flip."
So yeah, when you flip it, are you just like yep, thank you very much.
Yeah,
The
I said
die.
amp, and then the judge, like, told me to stop. I think he, like, didn't want me to make sure I wasn't, like, going to take my prize cards. I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
no," and then I flipped the coin, and
uh,
fortunately, it landed on heads,
yeah,
but
your $10,000 coin flip slash dice roll until the other $10,000 moment happens later.
yeah.
But yeah, so after that, you had the wild comeback in that game, going down from four prizes. By the way, multiple people wanted me to ask you about that kind of moment. both Nagi fan and Godmaster Bun on Twitter. We're basically just asking like what's kind of playing in your mind at that point when you are down four prizes. Obviously, you kind of have an idea of how to win the game at that point because you have practiced this a bunch. But like, how much panic and fear are setting in?
I don't know, like, I actually got a little bit excited because there wasn't a Flutter in the active anymore. I'm like, "Okay, I can actually play a turn out." I'm not in
Right.
the best spot to win, but at least I can do something to force him to maybe make a play, make a decision, instead of just sitting there and watching my Pokemon slowly get knocked out. So I'd say I was actually pretty excited when the Iron Hands died.
Yeah, finally get to play the game. So I guess that's
Yeah.
pretty fair. Yeah. And then going into game two, then obviously really long game one, especially just because the way the game kind of played out. So you're feeling pretty good that if it does go to game three, um, there'll be there won't be enough time for it to probably finish, and you are favored in those kinds of scenarios as the Lost Box deck compared to Gardevoir. So how are you feeling kind of going into game two with how it all goes out?
Yeah, after getting the game 1 win, that was definitely a huge swing, but after seeing the opening game 2, I wasn't feeling quite
Yeah.
as good anymore. It was kinda like game 1, except I had even less to work with, I think, and I kinda just got completely ran over. I tried just like I tried game 1, but I had much less, like, chance to come back that game, and that game kinda ended up getting over pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So on the ropes, then, kind of going into game three, decent amount of time on the clock still, but it's still very unlikely for the game to actually finish in time. So very likely to go to sudden death at that point. What are your thoughts as game three starts to unfold?
Yeah, so I knew going into game 3, it was gonna be important just to make sure I got ahead on prizes. I didn't necessarily need to play to keep all of my resources available because we likely wouldn't have time to finish every single turn of the game.
Right,
At one point, I even didn't have had back in a Roxanne because I was like, "Most likely, I won't be needing this. The game will probably be over by the time this card would be impactful."
right.
So it was just yeah, I was just trying to make sure I could get set up fast. I think my turn 1 wasn't great, but I did get to use 1 Comfy before he ability locked me, I think, and then I had enough turn 2 maybe to get into a Boss Cramorant play, I think if I remember right, on a Corellia. Maybe it was turn 3 actually, to be honest, when I did that. I don't exactly remember, but I had a little bit more going on in that hand than I had the first 2 games, so I could actually, put a little bit of pressure on him and take a prize lead and
Hmm.
give myself a chance.
Yeah, and then as the game kind of goes out, you're still in a you don't get the wild unfair stamp combo after that cram KO, so nothing horrible happens to you from
Because
there.
he doesn't play Unfair
Right,
Stamp,
right.
right?
Hyperoma,
Yeah.
right. I remember. So yeah, so you're not worried at that point. So you're pretty chill from there. And then the big thing that kind of happens towards the game is the entire game you're looking for your prime catcher, and you're just like you just never see it basically the entire game, right?
Yeah. That was definitely like I had a bunch of different lines to go for, but I was like, if I drew like the turn before, I was like, if I draw a Prime Catcher here and get the Greninja playoff, the game probably is just over.
Right, because
I
because
was hoping to see
Stefan
that.
didn't.
I still got the Sableye playoff to put some
Right.
pressure on and give myself better lines, but I was definitely a little bit disappointed to not just see game right away the turn
Yes,
before.
I remember Stefan throwing Drifloon instead of Klefki during the game, primarily for I'm assuming for bundle reasons to kind of keep locks going, but obviously leaving open for the prime catcher Klefki into Greninja play, and then you just never get it off until the last turn of the game where that Klefki doesn't matter anymore at that point. Um, so yeah, so just what's going on that last turn then before the judge shuffle happens? Kind of talk me through that.
Yeah, so I definitely messed up. I should have started the turn
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Stop instead of Iron Bundle. I've talked about this a little bit. I told myself that too before, like when he played the Iono and I drew my hand. I was like, okay, we should start with Pokestop because I had the Iron Bundle in hand. His turn went on for a while after that though, and I kind of like forgot. And then when I started my turn, I was like, oh, I should probably use Bundle first to force him to make a decision. But that's just wrong because if I had Pokestopped into Lost Vacuum, the game would have been over. I could have Lost Vacuumed, and then I had Super Rod and Mirage Gate to retreat and take the Greninja knockout on his Flutter Mane. So
Right.
that was definitely not my best play, but I didn't Pokestop into any items anyway, so it actually didn't really end up mattering
Sure.
because I had to use the bundle at that point anyway to use a flower selecting. So at that point, I go Super Rod back in some energies in Sableye. So if I draw into Sableye, I also have the out of like just using the Mirage Gate, powering it up and retreating, and then taking the knockout. I also had like a Nest Ball in there. I had a Chorus. I had a Prime Catcher. So I had like decent different plays I could get drawn to find game, but it was definitely pretty scary at that point because I knew I only had one comfy in play. This one kind of needed to find me at least something useful, but luckily it did find the prime catcher.
Yeah, you still at that point was there literally any outs for you, or did you need to get prime catcher? I can't remember exactly.
Well, so yeah, if I drew Sableye without an energy, then I could go Mirage Gate to Sableye, Comfy Retreat.
Right, right,
Or if I drew Nest Ball, I think I had a Chorus left and I had the Prime Catcher. And if I drew just energy, I could also go Concealed to try to
right. Yeah,
find
you still
Chorus or Prime
concealed. Yeah.
Catcher.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So
I
it
see.
was, but I only had two energy in the deck. So if I drew Sableye with an energy, I actually couldn't hit the Lost Mind play either, which was interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, pretty interesting how it all shook out, and then, of course, get the judge shuffle at the end. Colton Fay into exactly prime catcher. Gus, Greninja KO win the game, and you're set from there. So, uh, yeah, now that you're a champion, what was kind of running through your mind at that point?
I don't know. I was really relieved with how the end of the game played out. I felt really good when he played the I don't know. I had lots of outs to game in my deck, but my initial hand didn't have the cards I needed. So definitely got really stressful at the end, and I was just relieved that I was able to barely close it out at the end.
Right, right. Um, so follow up question: how are you spending your $25,000?
Yeah, I don't know yet. Hopefully saving it, put it to a good place in the future.
Yeah,
Don't need too much right now. It's still in college, but
right.
hopefully in the future we'll end up coming up pretty big. So we'll see.
For sure. So now we're going into Worlds in a couple of months. Obviously, a lot of testing, a lot of prep to do. Do you think your process is going to be different at all in terms of preparation and mindset and stuff going into Worlds as it was for say NAIC or Indy or whatever?
I mean, I think I'm gonna try to play a lot of games. Probably try a few different decks as well. Like I locked on Lost Box pretty early for NAIC. I'd like to lock on a deck pretty early for Worlds too, but we have like 2 months now at this point, so I could
Yeah,
definitely try
yeah.
a few different decks first before kind of locking into a deck. So that's gonna be something interesting. We're getting a few new cards as well, but it's not like a full set. So the format will definitely be somewhat similar, so some of this practice can carry over. But yeah, trying to play probably a lot of different games, a few different decks as well. I don't know. It's interesting because last year was my first Worlds and Masters,
Hmm.
kind of seeing how it all shook out, and this year hopefully a little bit more prepared. Didn't go
Yeah,
super well last year.
yeah. So this is going to be your second Worlds. We actually just released a video on the Dead Draw Gaming YouTube of me and Jake talking about the new Worlds format. How is the new Worlds format kind of impacting how you're going to approach this Worlds? Are you scared of it with the whole 3 round day two thing and just how rough the format is in general for Worlds?
It's really interesting. Like, it does give a little bit more value to the round one buy. Like
Yeah,
I didn't know how useful that was going to be when we were trying to get that, but with only 11 rounds, round one buy is definitely more useful. So that's like nice, I guess, because I have that. And it seems like it's probably going to be like 9-2 cut. So probably trying to pick a deck that ideally doesn't tie too much. I
yeah.
don't think my NAIC deck tied too much. My only tie was the ID. So picking a deck that doesn't isn't going to be always tying is good when you need to go X2. But that's how it is at regionals too, and people still end up on decks that tie. So there's that.
Sounds good. Well, looking forward to talking to you more about that Worlds process as we get closer to Worlds. Before we get into our normal mailbag stuff, because we got a lot of your questions, a lot of people are very excited to ask you a lot of different questions. I kind of want to talk about a little bit about the deck first, just kind of the key decisions that you made with the deck. So, first one being Manaphy. Why no Manaphy? Also, I think somebody asked about Manaphy too. Let me double check.
Yeah, so Manphy is
I don't think
not
so.
a
Never mind.
great card like
Yeah,
overall in this deck. Like I know Andrew Gantner, he had two cards different than me. One of his two differences was he put a Manaphy in the deck, and he will tell you it was not super great for him. It was not a card that he needed, and it probably could have been better filled by a different slot. And then, and like in my testing, I really didn't feel like I needed Manaphy too much. It's obviously good in the mirror, but I think the more important card in the mirror is having the Roxanne. Kind of
yeah.
forces really awkward plays from your opponent, and I did end up including that. Even though I didn't really want to, I was like, it probably is worth including. So I think that's the more important one to have in the mirror. And then Manaphy's not too useful overall in other matchups, to be honest. If Lugia was in a spot where they could run you over with a Ogre Pawn play, I think you're probably already losing if they just use Iron Hands. And like Chen Pao is not a super high percent deck, and that's already like a fine matchup. Manaphy would definitely make it better, but I was able to beat both of the ones that I actually played it out against anyway without it. So overall, I don't think that's a card you need to include in the deck.
Um, Katie PTCG on Twitter was asking, did you miss Roaring Moon? Slash, are there any matchups the deck really struggles with?
So Roaring Moon is like an okay card. I kept considering it, but I really didn't want to play it. It forces your deck to be a lot more like awkward. You have to cut into your counts a little bit.
Yeah,
I think without Roaring Moon, the probably the biggest issue matchup is Charizard with Jirachi. I hit one Charizard. They didn't play Jirachi, and I didn't expect Jirachi to be very played in Charizard going
yeah,
into the tournament. So that was something I was fine just saying. If I hit one, I hope they don't draw super well because like I didn't expect Charizard to be too popular, and I expected the vast majority of them to not play Jirachi. And the one I hit didn't play Jirachi, and Sableye did end up coming up pretty big. So I would say that's a matchup where if they started including Jirachi, you might need to consider putting in the Roaring Moon, especially if it got more popular again. But overall, you just kind of have to be careful with your damage. Make sure that you're not letting them set up too many big threats that you can't knock out. Against stuff like a Dragapult, you might have to just two-shot their big threat. But if you took enough prizes on little things before they set up, that's like okay.
right, makes sense. Chase Mamba TCG on Twitter asking kind of the usefulness of Iron Thorns throughout the run and cards thoughts on the card going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a super great card, but it's really good against Lugia, and that was what I expected to be the most popular deck in day one. I think that's what ended up being the most popular deck. So it was definitely something that was good to have an answer to. I did use it in a couple other spots. I like against Chen Pao when I started it, it really made his board a lot worse. I wasn't even gonna start it. Like I was gonna automatically start like the Sableye or something out of my hand. I was like, okay, actually wait, maybe if I start this Iron Thorns, he won't be able to play the game very much, especially going
Right.
second in that matchup. I was like, I maybe need to find some different way to gain an advantage. So it's interesting. It definitely has applications in other matchups, but overall, it's there for Lugia, and you want to put it up against Lugia as soon as possible. Usually, like especially if you're going second, if you can't pull off the attack, it's just important to get it into the active, and you can probably buy yourself a turn a lot of the time.
Makes sense. Let's see here. China TCG on Twitter asking any changes to the list you'd make going forward. Oh, they're the ones who asked about the Manaphy thing. Yeah, did you get punished at all for it? Seems like you did fine against the Champals, so I guess the answer
Yeah,
is no.
in
Yeah,
the mirror, there was a couple times where it probably would have been nice to have, but
sure.
overall, I think it was probably better served as a consistency card in the deck. So I wasn't upset to not have it.
Okay, then yeah. Any other changes you'd make to the list going forward?
I mean,
Ignoring
I would
worlds, I
say
guess. Yeah.
like I really like the list, but it might have to change a little bit going forward if people start including stuff like the Jirachi. You might need to consider putting in the Roaring Moon again, or also there's an argument for Manaphy a little bit more going if you want to play it at Worlds because of the new Kyurem card that comes out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have been looking at the new set too much. That's really annoying. But I don't even like the deck is definitely worse if that card just exists in general because even if your opponent doesn't play it, like now are you just like benching Manaphy against random matchups, or like if you don't, then if they just use their Kyurem, it's pretty bad. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. That's definitely an interesting thing. I think it will depend if people actually include that card or not. Because if that is like a card that's getting included into decks, I might just want to play a different deck than Lost Box.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, especially if people are like worried about tying with Lost Box too, more reason to kind of go away from it. Unless they're you, who has no problems tying with Lost Box. So,
Trust me, in some tournaments it's been a problem. Last year at NAIC, I went 9-6 with Lost
whew,
Box. So, yeah,
isn't that what,
this
like that,
tournament did a little bit better on that front.
I was gonna say? I'm pretty sure that's Gabe's record at this tournament.
Yeah, this it was at this tournament. Yeah.
um, kind of the other things I want to talk about was the four Pokestop in the list. Obviously, kind of a change from pretty much all other like older Turbo Lost Box lists from like this season and last season, where most of them were like three at most typically. But you're going full on four. There were so many times where, again, I was sitting next to you for a lot of rounds. There's so many times where I just would see you put that down immediately, hit the stop, and then kind of go from there. Your turn one as your very first action. So, yeah, why were you feeling the four? This is also a card that I didn't see everyone else who was also doing the list. Not everyone was doing four stop too. So, just kind of your thoughts on the four stop and how good it was.
So there was initially three when we still played like Raikou for a Sealstone, but then ended up cutting this Raikou, cutting the Sealstone to like put in the Iron Thorns instead because that seemed like a much better answer to Lugia, and you didn't really need Raikou that much. Anyway, like Iron Thorns can still kill Pidgeot too, so there wasn't much point to play a Raikou if you were already going to cut. If you're already going to put in the Iron Thorns, there's not much point to play the Raikou, and then the Forest Sealstone also obviously has to go out of the deck. So it was kind of like a replacement of that where I have an extra space now. I kind of want another vacuum target anyway, so I can get more cards in the Lost Zone. And it's just a card that's like really good to draw into. I would notice like in my opening hand, if I didn't have a Pokestop, I'd be like, this deck's so much worse because Pokestop just it gets you free cards, it thins out bad cards, and it gets you more cards in the Lost Zone with Lost Vacuum. It just lets you push so much more and threaten so many more different plays. It's a card you almost always want to open, and also it's a card that you also want in the end game. So like you might also want off some selectings, discard one of other Pokestops. You might want to vacuum it away to get build up your Lost Zone, get to 10 or whatever. So it's one of those things where you want to be able to be aggressive with them and use them while still having access to them in the late game, and four actually helps a lot with that. So I would say I ended up being pretty happy with having four of them in my deck.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Very good card. It's also the type of card that like a lot of the matchups you go against don't even want to like touch it, so it ends up not even being like a bad stadium to have down in general, which is pretty
Yeah,
neat.
it definitely help the opponent like too much. Like obviously sometimes it can help them bail them out of like a bad hand or
Sure,
something, but
sure.
it's not quite as helpful as like some of the like something like an artisan might be to your opponent. So overall, it's yeah, and a lot of decks don't have too many stadium bumps either. So
Hmm.
ends up staying and play the entire game, or against something like Gardevoir, they might only have artisans, and then worst case, they bump your stop. You can't get items, but at least you can still search out your Sableye against them or something. So
Yeah, it's
like being able to keep a stadium in play is just such a good thing in this format.
yeah. Four stadiums in general too is like an answer, like an amount of stadiums that most decks just can't out stadium, even with vacuums and stuff. Like very few decks can actually constantly remove that, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you're just always gonna have a Pokestop down most of the time, which is very good for your list. Um, And then, was there anything else I want to talk about with your list? Oh yeah, Iron Thorns. I wanted to talk about the attack Volt Cyclone. How often were you taking advantage of the moving the energy off of it?
That's actually it's very annoying that it makes you do that. I would rather not do that. Like, it causes some issues if you, like, lost on a few energies, or, like, it makes it a much worse option against control something like control because it's not low maintenance, you have to constantly move off the energy, so that effect's actually really annoying. It can, like, occasionally be helpful if it's gonna get knocked out, right? You can power up an Iron Hands against Lugia on the bench or something, or you can get an energy on a Comfey so you have a pivot,
Right.
but the fact that it moves energy is overall a negative, so at least in this deck.
Yeah, I like in theory you can kind of set up some nice plays. If you're assuming it's getting knocked out, it's actually can be kind of nice in the sense that you're at
Yeah.
least setting up another attacker like Hands or Ursulina or whatever on the bench. But yeah, kind of annoying as well. Makes sense.
Yeah, like, it
So
lets you set up the Iron Hands with 1 Mirage Gate, right, against Lugia if
yeah,
you
yeah.
move 1 to it, and then they knock out the Iron Thorns, now it's just gate attached to the hands to use it. That's, like, one of the nice uses of it, but overall, it can be pretty annoying.
So another question from Twitter then. How does from Tyrant TCG, how does Lost Box change from your list heading into Worlds? Kind of mentioned already, I guess the Manaphy is probably the big kind of consideration, right?
Yeah, I think overall, I really liked my list for this format, but yeah, especially, like, I don't know if also the decks will change at all, like, if we get
Right,
some new cards
yeah.
in the new set, but I assume the format will be pretty similar overall. And I think, like, I really did like the list I played. I think a second Pokegear is, like, the one card you could consider over something like 4th Switch, but overall, the deck was really good.
Makes sense, yeah. So yeah, we can kind of. Oh, here's another kind of deck related question from Soax Core, asking what are the general tips against lax/control? I guess it is Iron Thorns as soon as possible to shut down Rotom and Pidgeot. But what other tips do you have?
So against something like Block Lax, you really don't want to use Iron Thorns. It doesn't do enough damage, and it's just really awkward to move the energies off.
Yeah,
What I would generally do is try to get a Comfy active, and then don't use any more switch cards. Try to build up to either 7 or 10. And this, like, you want to use Sableye and Iron Hand. It's really awkward. It's definitely unfavored without Spiritomb, but a lot of times you can get there like using Sableye to set up amp plays for 2 or 3 prizes on their Snorlaxes and Rotoms. And they can't just use Penny every single turn, especially if you're spreading to multiple things, and then it's also hard for them to find counter catchers if they're trying to use pennies on everything. So you can a lot of times set up winning the game in not too many attacks if you can get to Sableye, but that also does a lot of times take a lot of cards out of your deck and into the lost zone. So it's definitely a pretty awkward matchup, but I would say try to use this combination of Sableye and Iron Hands to win the game. And I beat them on ladder sometimes. I'm glad I didn't hit any in the tournament though. It's not a great matchup. And then the control
yeah.
matchup, I, like, tried to test the night before, only played, like, a couple games. That was the first time I ever played the matchup. I think you wanna try to take out their Pidgeot as soon as possible. Like, we were trying to play it slowly, but then what would end up happening is, like, they would just start Luxraying you. So that was, like, a problem where I was like, "Okay, you kinda just have to go fast, try to kill the Pidgeot, or even Sableye, kill the Pidgeys before they can get it up, and then that can be pretty hard for them to win." I know Michael hit one, and he said that the matchup didn't feel super great, but he could have also maybe won. So I think that's another like probably slightly unfavored, but not a terrible matchup. The Iron Thorns might be a good attacker in that matchup as well.
Sure, sure.
but I haven't played it enough to really know that for sure.
Gotcha.
I know that killing the Pidgeot is like your first priority though.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, kind of the general mailbag questions now. I guess first, though, I'm going to put this in our chat. I just put it. So, if you click the chat button, you'll see it. But Jake just sent me a spreadsheet. It says Hexter Season 2 TDT rankings October 6th, 2020. And you are ranked second place on this list. No, Jake is second
I'm
and you're
third.
third. Yeah. What is this? Why did he send this to me?
Yeah, this was the rankings for the Hixer Invitational, I assume.
I see.
Um, yeah, me and Jake would play these a lot. I guess he has me beat by 1 point on this one, which is
There
pretty
you
rough,
go.
but
You got him beat by $25,000, so that's all good.
that is true. Maybe he needs to step it up a little bit there. I don't know.
um, yeah, it's so funny kind of looking at these. Like, literally, Gabe Smart a few places down, Rogerson a couple places down from there. Pretty funny how many players were
Yeah,
playing at the
like
time that are still really
Vinny's
good.
done pretty well as well,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
it is cool to see all the different people who have started doing well in the in person events who kind of played a lot of the online tournaments.
yeah. It's a weird thing about how long ago this was too, because yeah, you, Reagan, Vinny were all like really young during this time too. um, but yeah, so final mailbag questions. Let's see, where's a good one to start with? So Nick Pixels asking, how do you keep up with the meta and its developments? I feel like the game changes constantly with a dozen tier shifts every week, and then tournaments are won by stuff that isn't considered top tier or flew under the radar. How do I keep up? Is the best way to keep up?
I mean, I think in general the most important thing is like knowing how to play your deck. I think like the decks that end up winning tournaments are usually winning tournaments because the best players are the ones playing them, which just means that someone who knows how to play their deck really well is playing them. So I generally it's just most important to find a deck that is like decent in the meta, right? Has decent matchups, probably tier one, maybe like tier 1.5, and then kind of just play as many games with it as possible. Ideally, it's a deck that can be a little bit flexible, doesn't take like crazy auto losses or anything, and you could change it a little bit to the developments of the meta. But I would say don't try to be changing a different deck every single week based on changes in the meta. You want to kind of stick with one deck and play as many games with it as possible. Two at the most. Like, don't
Yeah,
be playing every deck in the format. I don't.
yeah, I think that's a pretty recurring topic or piece of advice that a lot of players will give is just to stick to one deck, main it for a while, learn it as best you can. There's a lot of players this season who kind of just got all their points with one deck and it worked out pretty well with them. So definitely good advice. You're a player who's switched from time to time, but you've played a lot of Lost Box over like the last few years in general, right? So
Yeah, I switch between a few different decks, but really, like, the vast majority of my placements are, like, with, like, comfy decks and then, like, Lugia
right,
and Mew. And then I had a couple turns with the Dialga when I worked on that a lot.
right. This next question is one you're decently suited to answer as a full time student. Is what is your advice for people with limited time, school, job, kids, whatever the case, and limited opportunity to travel, on how they can make the most of their time to hopefully transition into a top tier player? I remember for you, like you literally couldn't go to EUIC at all because of finals at the time. So how do you kind of balance all that?
I mean, if you don't have too much time to play, like, you can like, testing against other people is really good or, like, in-person stuff, but that also takes a much more time.
Yeah.
Like, and your games end up taking a lot longer because 'cause you're, like, joking around, having fun, or you're talking through every single play. So just, like, getting on ladder for, like, an hour if that's the time you have, right? You can play, like, probably 5 or 6 games maybe in that time, some of your games go pretty quick. So that's just an easy way to get games in. Like, I know I definitely have more time at some points than others. Like, I had a point in the middle of the season where I didn't have very much time to test, and my results kind of reflected that. I missed a few day twos. So it can definitely be pretty rough if you don't have enough time. But when you do have time, just try to play a few games like on something like live. It's very quick to just boot that up, play a few games, and just make sure when you're playing games, you're actually thinking through like why you're winning, why you're losing, or like was this the right play? Even if it worked, it might not have been. Like you have to be thinking about different things, not just like did I win the game? Then my play must have been
Yeah.
good. Like be
Yeah.
thinking about like what happened in the game or what could have happened and like why your play was good or bad.
Yeah, honestly, this is like the type of trap I fell into like early on the season. Like this is my first like real competitive season, and at Peoria I started like 5-2, and I was like, oh, I definitely have a good idea of like how to play this deck. I was playing Rapid Strike at the time, and I was like, oh, I definitely have a good idea of like everything, and I just kind of got unlucky towards the end with some of my matchups and how things kind of ran out. But there's always ways you can play better, always ways to improve, and it's really important to try to figure out how to spot that. And For me, it's always just been playing games against myself has been the best way to kind of figure things out and think through things I wouldn't normally think through. And I feel like I learn less from spamming games online than you do, but you're also a much better player than I am. So it
Yeah, no,
definitely takes time. Yeah.
I think playing a lot of games on ladder can be really helpful, but it only works if you are able to like reflect on the games
Right. Yeah.
yourself. Like, and a lot of times you don't know necessarily if your opponent's making the right play or not, so you kind of have to be able to infer what they're doing, which can definitely be a little bit harder sometimes. So playing against yourself can be another good option. You can kind of see both hands and think through, like, is this a common play that they would be able to pull off in this scenario, right? It can definitely make it easier to see what's going on, but it just takes a little bit longer to do that too.
For sure. Last question here from PM Plays 1089. Did you have a mentality shift from starting playing to winning tournaments? Did you notice any kind of shift in how you approach things during that time?
I don't know. I mean, my first regional, I definitely played a little bit scared. I was kind of just happy to make J2. And then I was kind of like, which is a pretty bad mentality. And then I was just like, I was like really excited to get top 32. I was like, okay, now at this point, I kind of probably should be more focused on actually like just treating every round the same and trying to win each round, right? You're not like, you shouldn't necessarily be trying to just be impressed by what you've done, what you're like. You need to be focusing on just each round, treat them all the same, right? Ideally, your round should be treated the same whether you're at a league challenge or a regional, right? Like you should just be thinking, okay, how do I win this round? What are the lines to take? And I mean, that's kind of how I try to approach it. I feel like I don't get super nervous near the end of tournaments because I just kind of treat every game the same, which is pretty good. But
Right.
I think that's a tough thing for a lot of people to do. But
Yeah. It's easier to do when you
you just try
have
to
as
be
much
locked
experience
in,
as
try
you
to
do.
focus on every game and make the best plays you can.
All right. Very sound, solid advice to end off this interview here. Andrew, any shout outs you'd like to do? Where can people find you on Twitter, yada, yada?
Yeah, shout out to Dead Draw Gaming, right, for having me on the podcast. You can find me on Twitter at PokeHawkeye, and I also plan to publish an article on Cutter Tap probably in about a week about my Lost Box list and my run at NAIC. So be sure to check that out.
All right. You do not want to miss that. Shout out to Cutter Tap for sponsoring the team. You can find me on Twitter at EtchyOK, and I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Etchy. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. Congratulations again on your big victory, and super excited to kind of follow your journey to Worlds pretty soon. Best of luck with your prep and at Worlds, and we'll see you again on the podcast sometime soon. And that's going to be it for this episode of the Dead Draw Gaming Podcast. Thank you so much for supporting us. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for another episode. Take care.